It begins softly. Long ago, in the long shadows of forgotten castles, the world was ordered by rules that no one remembers creating. They were whispered by priests, written by monks, and obeyed by peasants without question. The medieval mind did not ask why, it simply followed, because that was what life meant: obedience to something older, stronger, and invisible. Time passed, kings died, plagues came and went, but the rules lingered like dust in the air, clinging to everything we still do today. The strange thing about these medieval rules is that we still carry them, centuries later, without realizing. They live in our habits, our institutions, our politics, and our manners. We obey them not because we must, but because they feel natural, as if humanity learned them in its sleep and forgot to unlearn them. History, it seems, never fully dies. It simply hides behind modern curtains, smiling quietly while we think ourselves free. One of the first rules that lingered from the medieval world is the idea of hierarchy, the invisible ladder of importance that places one human above another. In the Middle Ages, this was called the Great Chain of Being. Every creature, from angels to worms, had its place. The king ruled by divine right, the lord ruled beneath him, the knight beneath the lord, and the peasant beneath them all. God was at the top, hell at the bottom, and the human soul somewhere in between. It was not only politics, but cosmology, a vision of the universe structured like a pyramid. Today, we say we believe in equality, yet our institutions still hum with the rhythm of hierarchy. We stand in lines, salute flags, seek permission, crave promotion, and build societies that mirror the same medieval pyramid, only now the top wears a suit instead of a crown. In offices and governments, in schools and armies, the ghost of the great chain of being whispers that order comes from above. We still kneel, not before kings, but before titles, money, and reputation. The rule remains: someone must be higher, someone must be lower. Another rule that survived is ritual cleanliness, the belief that purity is moral and impurity is sinful. In medieval times, sin was not only spiritual, it was visible. A dirty body suggested a dirty soul. The Church preached that washing the hands and fasting the body cleansed the heart. Bathing, confession, and penance were all forms of the same logic: remove the stain, restore the order. Disease, too, was seen as punishment for moral failure. Now, centuries later, we still follow that rule without the theology. We sanitize, detox, and diet as if redemption comes through soap and juice. We label foods clean or dirty, people toxic or pure. The medieval sense of guilt survives beneath the modern obsession with wellness. What was once sin has become impurity, and what was once salvation has become health. The body replaced the soul, but the rule never changed. Then there was the medieval fear of chaos, the dread that without structure, the world would collapse. Every medieval city was a fragile fortress against the unknown. The forests beyond the walls were full of demons, witches, and bandits. The human mind, too, was a battlefield of order and temptation. Laws, customs, and prayers existed to keep the wildness out. We no longer fear witches, but we still live in walls, digital, legal, psychological. We still crave borders to separate safe from unsafe, us from them. Modern society, with all its screens and passwords, is simply another castle in disguise. We fear losing control as deeply as any monk feared the devil. The rule remains: control must be maintained, even if no one remembers what it's for. Another medieval remnant is the calendar of virtue, the rhythm of guilt and pardon that shaped time itself. In those days, life was a cycle of sin, confession, and forgiveness. Sunday was for repentance. Festivals were for release. Work and rest followed sacred logic. Even the seasons carried moral meaning: winter for silence, spring for renewal, summer for toil, and autumn for reflection. Today, our calendar looks secular, yet its bones are the same. We still divide time into workdays and weekends, guilt and reward, Monday discipline and Friday indulgence. We call it productivity, but it is penance by another name. We confess our laziness through resolutions and cleanse it through gym memberships. The church bells have been replaced by notifications, yet the rhythm is unchanged. The rule remains: time must redeem us. One of the strangest rules we still follow comes from medieval superstition: the fear of the unseen. The medieval world was haunted by invisible forces, angels, demons, curses, miracles. Life was a stage of constant unseen influence. When crops failed, spirits were blamed. When the sick recovered, prayers were praised. We call ourselves rational now, but our faith in invisible systems is stronger than ever. We obey algorithms, believe in energy, trust brands, and fear viruses we cannot see. We no longer burn witches, but we still search for scapegoats. Our faith has changed its costume, not its nature. The rule remains: the unseen controls the seen. There was also the medieval obsession with reputation, the fragile armor of honor that could never be repaired once stained. A knight could lose everything with a whisper of shame. A lady could fall from grace by rumor alone. Honor was currency, and gossip was war. Today, we live in the same theater, only louder. Social media has revived the medieval court of public opinion, where likes and shares are the new heralds and jesters. We still fear humiliation more than death. We still fight invisible duels for reputation, still polish our identities like armor. The rule remains: appearance is survival. Medieval society also lived by the rule of surveillance, the all-seeing eyes of God, the church, and the community. No one was truly alone. Confession was mandatory, and secrecy was sin. Every action was watched, every thought potentially judged. In our age, we call it data. Our devices confess for us. Our cameras watch. Our records remember. We live again under omniscient eyes, only now the gaze is digital, not divine. The rule remains: someone must always be watching. And then there was the rule of ownership, the idea that everything belongs to someone. In feudal Europe, land defined existence. To own was to exist. To serve was to survive. Even freedom had a price. Peasants rented their lives from lords, who rented theirs from kings, who claimed their crowns from God. We still live by that logic. We rent our homes, sell our hours, and measure worth by possession. The feudal pyramid has turned into an economic one. The invisible hand of the market has replaced the divine right of kings. The rule remains: value flows upward. The medieval rule of punishment also persists. Justice in those days was public and performative. Crimes were punished to restore divine order, not fairness. The sinner's suffering pleased heaven, and the crowd's horror preserved obedience. Modern prisons and trials may appear humane, yet they follow the same script. Punishment is less about correction than reassurance, the comfort of seeing order restored. We call it law, but it is the same old theater of control. The rule remains: the world must witness suffering to believe in justice. Medieval people also lived by the rule of silence, that certain questions must never be asked. Why must the king rule? Why must suffering exist? Why does God choose some and not others? Such questions were dangerous because they unraveled the tapestry of belief. We like to think we have escaped that silence, but we have only changed its form. Today we silence in other ways, through distraction, noise, and busyness. The forbidden questions remain unasked because no one has time to ask them. The rule remains: silence is safety. Even marriage in its modern form still carries medieval echoes. Once it was a contract of property, arranged for alliance, inheritance, and legitimacy. Love was a luxury. The Church blessed unions not for passion, but for order. Now we marry for love, but keep the same rituals: rings, vows, witnesses, signatures. The ceremony remains sacred, even in secular hands. The rule remains: society begins with a contract. In medicine, too, the medieval rules persist. Musicians once balanced humors, blood, bile, phlegm, and melancholy to restore harmony in the body. Illness was imbalance. Cure was restoration. Today we call it chemistry, but we still chase balance between work and rest, mind and body, health and pleasure. The medieval physician would recognize our language: detox, balance, harmony. The words changed, the belief did not. The medieval schoolroom also shaped us. Education was memorization, obedience, and hierarchy. The teacher was authority, the student silence. Knowledge was something received, not discovered. Modern classrooms still hum with that rhythm. We praise creativity, but grade conformity. We celebrate innovation, but teach repetition. The medieval monk's discipline lingers in every standardized test. The rule remains: knowledge must descend from above. And then there was the medieval rule of ceremony, the endless need to mark moments with formality. Every event had a ritual: coronation, confession, burial, blessing. The Church turned time itself into a choreography. Today we still crave ceremony: the graduation, the wedding, the award show, the holiday sale. The gestures are emptier, but the instinct is the same. The rule remains: meaning must be performed. And even the medieval dream of immortality persists. Pilgrims walked for months to touch relics, to earn forgiveness, to secure eternity. Today we upload, preserve, and archive digital relics of our existence stored in invisible cathedrals of data. We build legacies, followers, and memories that outlast us. The rule remains: to die is to be forgotten, so we must leave a mark. The medieval world was full of fear: fear of sin, fear of nature, fear of the unknown. It was also full of faith, in order, in heaven, in redemption. And somewhere between those opposites, modern life still stands, pretending to be new, but repeating the same choreography. The robes have turned to suits, the prayers to policies, the religions to ideologies. The masses still gather in new cathedrals, but the game remains the same: fear and faith, control and release, order and uncertainty. After the medieval age began to fade, when the black robes of priests started to pale beneath the light of a new century, the rules did not die. They hid in the cracks of the new world. The Renaissance came, painting light upon the walls of Europe, yet the same invisible chains clinked quietly beneath the music of progress. Humanism rose, but it rose upon old stones. The cathedrals were still standing, the minds within them still knelt. People began to speak of reason, of discovery, of the dignity of man. They painted human bodies as if holiness had muscle and blood. But the same ancient pattern ruled behind the beauty: order, hierarchy, purity, obedience, and faith in the unseen. The Church no longer held all knowledge, yet knowledge itself still demanded reverence. The professor replaced the priest, the book replaced the altar, the lecture replaced the sermon. The rule remained, wisdom descends from above, and the student listens in silence. Even art obeyed this quiet command. The great masters painted the human form, yet always with divine geometry, with lines that mirrored the balance of heaven. To be creative meant to imitate perfection, not to question it. Harmony, symmetry, proportion, these were moral as much as aesthetic. The medieval rule of order had survived the storm of discovery. Beauty still meant obedience to form. And then came money. The medieval soul feared greed as one of the 7 deadly sins, but the Renaissance baptized it as ambition. Gold became sacred again, not as offering to God, but as proof of worth. Merchants built palaces, cities sold their silence to commerce, and the old sin became a virtue with a new name, success. Yet even success followed the same medieval rhythm. The merchant bowed to the noble bowed to the king, and all bowed to the invisible hierarchy of worth. The medieval chain of being returned, now tied with golden links. The market became the new heaven, the banker the new priest. The rule remained, value flows upward. The Reformation came like thunder, Luther's hammer striking the doors of the church, shattering the monopoly of holiness. People began to read Scripture for themselves, to question the old intermediaries. But even in rebellion, the structure of belief endured. The sermon remained, the congregation remained, the invisible watcher above remained. Every new church was an old church, rearranged. What changed was the tone, not the tune. The medieval world had sung in Latin. Now it sang in German, in English, in French. The melody was still about guilt, forgiveness, obedience, and destiny. The printing press multiplied words, but not freedom. The rule remained, truth must be revealed, not invented. As Europe marched toward the Enlightenment, candles turned into ideas, and ideas into revolutions. The philosophers claimed reason as their sword. The scientists claimed truth as their prize. They said the old world had been superstition, that now light had come. Yet the light cast the same shapes. The universe, once ruled by angels, was now ruled by laws. The invisible had changed its vocabulary, no longer divine, but mechanical. Newton became the new prophet, the cosmos his scripture. The heavens no longer sang psalms, they ticked like clocks. But even in this rational order, the medieval soul found comfort. It was still a world of structure, still a universe of command. The rule remained, everything has its place. The Enlightenment, for all its brilliance, never broke the medieval rhythm of control. It only shifted the throne. The mind replaced God. The intellect replaced faith. But the demand for order, for purity, for explanation, that was still the same old hunger, dressed in silver words. The human being was now both priest and worshipper, confessing ignorance to reason itself. The Industrial Revolution turned that spiritual order into physical form. The factory became the cathedral of progress. Bells were replaced by whistles, priests by managers, and prayers by time cards. People marched not to vespers, but to shifts. The discipline of monks became the discipline of workers. The medieval schedule of devotion, sunrise, labor, rest, returned as the rhythm of the clock. Steam and smoke were the new incense. The factory floor was an altar of repetition. The medieval sense of penance lived on in the exhaustion of labor, in the idea that hard work cleanses the soul. The rule remained, salvation through suffering. Even cities grew like monasteries, cells stacked upon cells, each holding a soul bound to duty. Streets were corridors, windows confessionals, bells reminders of order. People thought themselves modern, yet they lived as monks of industry. The medieval rule of silence became the etiquette of the worker. Speak little, obey quickly, produce faithfully. The age of reason was supposed to liberate man, but instead it taught him new ways to bow. The medieval serf became the modern employee. The lord became the employer. The chain remained invisible but unbroken. The Victorian era sealed the transformation. Society cloaked itself in morality, in codes of behavior, in strict gender roles that mirrored feudal obedience. A woman's virtue became her honor, just as it had been in the courts of knights. Men ruled in public, women in private, and reputation ruled over all. The old rule of purity returned, wearing lace and etiquette. The house became the new castle, the dinner table the new altar. Even science bowed to morality. The study of evolution spoke of survival and hierarchy, as if nature itself obeyed the feudal chain. Civilization was imagined as progress upward, from primitive to pure, savage to civilized, lower to higher. The ladder of being had changed names, but not direction. The rule remained: order must be vertical. Meanwhile, churches still rang their bells. Kings still blessed wars. Nations rose as new feudal kingdoms, waving banners of progress. People pledged loyalty to flags as their ancestors had to lords. The old rituals simply changed color. The medieval crusade returned as nationalism, holy wars reborn in the language of patriotism. The rule remained: obedience is sacred. When the 20th century arrived, filled with machines and wars, humanity thought it had finally escaped the ghosts of the past. Airplanes, telegraphs, engines, everything seemed new. Yet beneath it all, the old logic pulsed. The general still commanded the soldier. The state still demanded devotion. The citizen still confessed, paid, and obeyed. The medieval vow of loyalty survived through every revolution. Even the dream of paradise survived. Utopias replaced heavens. Ideologies replaced faith. But each promised the same thing: a world purified of evil, ruled by perfect order. Whether communist or capitalist, each mirrored the old theology: salvation through belief, punishment for sin, paradise for the faithful. The rule remained: history is a church without walls. As modern life grew faster, the rules became quieter, subtler. The hierarchy turned digital. The confession turned social. The surveillance turned invisible. We began to document our lives willingly, to share our own sins and prayers online. The medieval soul would understand it perfectly: the need to be seen, to be judged, to be absolved. We think we live in freedom, but the rhythm of obedience beats beneath our fingertips. Notifications have replaced bells. Followers have replaced parishioners. Likes have replaced blessings. The medieval rule of worth, to be seen is to exist, still governs our digital prayers. The screen is our stained glass, the profile our confession booth. The rule remains: faith in the reflection. Even language itself obeys the old laws. We still speak in binaries: good and evil, pure and corrupt, saved and lost. Our moral vocabulary has not evolved, it has merely shifted costume. The medieval priest once warned of temptation. The modern therapist warns of negativity. Both offer redemption through discipline. The rule remains: morality must be managed. And so the centuries rolled forward, polishing the same old patterns until they shone like new inventions. We built democracy upon monarchy's ruins, but our politics still echo the court: alliances, betrayals, pageantry, and ritual speeches. The medieval king simply changed clothes and became the modern leader. The subjects became voters. The throne became office. But the play remained the same. The rule remained. Power must perform. The courtroom, too, preserved the medieval theater of judgment. The robes, the language, the oaths, all descend from feudal ritual. The judge is a priest of law, his gavel, his scepter. The trial is not only decision, but ceremony, reminding all who watch that order still reigns. The rule remained. Authority must wear costume. And in schools, we still follow the medieval script of hierarchy and ritual. Bells mark the hours. Desks align in rows. Silence is rewarded. Obedience graded. The teacher lectures. The student writes. And the knowledge flows downward like holy water. We call it education, but it is still catechism in disguise. The rule remains. Knowledge belongs to the few. The workplace, too, follows the monastery's rhythm. Meetings are sermons, deadlines are vows, and leadership is sanctified. Promotions are blessings, dismissals are excommunications. The rule remained. Devotion must be measured in productivity. Even leisure obeys the old pattern. The medieval feast and festival have turned into holidays and weekends. Structured rebellion, permitted pleasure, controlled chaos. The calendar of indulgence has never disappeared. The rule remains: joy must be scheduled. Modern love, too, carries the same echo. The courtly love of medieval romance, distant, idealized, suffering, still defines the modern story of affection. The idea that love must conquer hardship, must prove itself through pain, comes straight from the troubadour's songs. The rule remains: love must suffer to be real. And so, in the quiet repetition of daily life, humanity continues to live by medieval commandments it no longer names. The form of the world has changed, but the spirit of order, purity, obedience, hierarchy, and ritual endures. The digital age is not the opposite of the medieval, it is its mirror. The cathedral has become the cloud. The scripture is now data. The priesthood is algorithmic. The faithful kneel not before altars, but before screens glowing in the dark. The rule remains: to be is to seem. The modern world built its glass towers on top of ancient castles. We call them skyscrapers, but their bones remember the fortress. They are vertical for the same reason spires were vertical, to reach upward, to mark hierarchy against the sky. The medieval man built to be closer to heaven. The modern man builds to be above his neighbor. The rule has not changed. Only the material has turned from stone to steel. Every city skyline is a forest of ambition repeating an old prayer. The office tower is a feudal ladder in disguise, each floor a rank, each window a badge of privilege. The peasants still walk below, looking up at the masters, now called executives, still cloaked in power and distance. Government, too, wears the same robes. The medieval crown turned into bureaucracy, the throne turned into parliament, yet the ritual remained untouched. Processions of ministers, flags waving like banners, speeches echoing like sermons, authority wrapped in ceremony. The medieval oath of fealty became the modern pledge of allegiance. Each nation demands its citizens kneel, not in gesture, but in loyalty. The king's portrait was replaced by a logo, the royal decree by a policy memo, the knight's armor by a suit. The rule remains: Power must be obeyed as if ordained. Our modern laws follow the same parchment that once governed kingdoms. We still cling to documents, seals, and signatures. The bureaucracy is nothing more than a monastery of paper, its monks typing prayers into endless forms. The medieval obsession with record-keeping, the list of tithes, the scroll of confessions, still rules our lives. We file, we document, we register, we submit. The ink has turned digital, but the spirit is the same. The rule remains. Obedience is recorded, not questioned. Even our idea of punishment traces back to the dungeons of old. The prison replaced the castle keep, the uniform replaced the chain, but the logic is unchanged. To reform is to isolate, to redeem through suffering, to prove loyalty by submission. The medieval soul believed sin must be purged. The modern system believes crime must be corrected. The punishment remains a ritual of purification. We no longer call it penance, but rehabilitation. The rule remains. Order is restored through pain. In medicine, the same medieval patterns whisper beneath the white coats. The doctor is the priest of the body, the hospital, the cathedral of healing. We enter in silence, we wait, we confess symptoms, we submit to authority. The robe of the physician, once the monk's habit, still carries that aura of sanctity. The patient bows before expertise. The doctor delivers the sermon of science. The rule remains. Faith in authority brings salvation. Hospitals themselves are monasteries of control. The beds are rows of obedience, the corridors lined with ritual cleanliness, the schedule governed by bells and charts. The medieval obsession with purity found a new name in sterilization. The rule remains. Dirt is sin, cleanliness is grace. And our food, too, carries the ghosts of old commandments. The medieval church ruled what could be eaten and when, dividing days into feasts and fasts. Today, diet culture does the same, replacing sin with calories, holiness with health. The moral language has changed, but the guilt remains. We confess indulgence to fitness gurus as once to confessors. The rule remains. Appetite must be punished. Even our clothing echoes the medieval hierarchy. The noble once wore silk, the peasant wool, and the difference spoke louder than words. Today, brands replace titles, but the code is identical. The logo is the crest of the clan, the price the measure of status. Fashion, like feudalism, thrives on visible difference. To dress below your station is still shameful. To dress above it, presumptuous. The rule remains. Status must be seen. The workplace continues the monastery's vow of order. The open-plan office is not freedom, but a cloister without walls. The medieval vow of silence now exists in the form of professionalism. We smile instead of pray. We obey instead of kneel. The hierarchy is hidden behind polite words, but every worker knows the chain. The manager is the abbot, the board the council of elders, the shareholders the invisible gods. The rule remains. Duty is devotion. Even our daily schedule comes from the monastic bells that divided the medieval day. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sixth, nones, vespers, compline. The rhythm of prayer became the rhythm of productivity. We rise, work, eat, rest, repeat. We time our lives with devices that replaced bells but served the same master, the clock. The medieval monastery trained the Western mind to worship time itself, and we still do. The rule remains. Salvation lies in discipline. Our architecture, our politics, our medicine, our work, all of them shaped by rules born in an age of superstition and faith. Yet we defend them as natural, necessary, inevitable. The medieval spirit whispers that obedience brings peace, that order brings safety. We obey because it feels moral, not because it makes sense. Even our entertainment mimics medieval storytelling. The heroes and villains still follow the same moral structure: the pure, the fallen, the redeemed. Fairy tales, epic movies, even political campaigns all replay the same moral pattern that guided medieval minds. We crave righteousness more than truth. The rule remains: virtue must have costume. Technology only deepens the illusion. The medieval church promised salvation through confession. The internet promises validation through visibility. We confess daily, not to priests, but to platforms. We share, we post, we seek absolution through likes. Our sins are overexposure and silence. Our penance is relevance. The rule remains: redemption is public. Education repeats the medieval structure of knowledge distribution. The student kneels metaphorically before the teacher, the curriculum carved in sacred order. Exams are trials, indulgences are relics proving worthiness. The student passes through stages of purification until finally they are declared enlightened enough to join the order of the employed. The rule remains: wisdom flows downward. Universities still bear the mark of their medieval birth. Their ceremonies, robes, Latin phrases, processions are echoes of monastic tradition. The graduation is a ritual of ordination, the professor a cleric of reason. The lecture hall is a chapel of silence. Even knowledge itself is divided into disciplines, like feudal territories, each with its own lords and borders. The rule remains: knowledge must be owned. In relationships, too, we follow medieval scripts. Marriage was once a contract of property and purity, sanctified by God. Today it is sanctified by law and social approval. The ceremony still echoes the church, the vows still sound like oaths, the promise still demands loyalty unto death. We have replaced divine authority with legal authority, but the structure remains sacred. The rule remains: love must be bound by ritual. The idea of romantic love itself was a medieval invention, born in the songs of knights and troubadours who praised distant, unattainable women as divine. That ideal still defines how we suffer in relationships today: longing, fidelity, jealousy, sacrifice. To suffer for love is still seen as noble. The rule remains: pain proves passion. Even our morality retains the medieval obsession with purity and corruption. The language of modern politics, of social movements, of outrage, all carry the same moral rhythm: the righteous versus the sinful, the pure versus the tainted. We have replaced demons with ideologies, heresy with misinformation, but the ritual of condemnation remains the same. The rule remains: the crowd must punish the impure. And beneath all of this, the idea of fate still governs our hearts. The medieval man believed destiny was written by God. The modern man believes it is written by circumstance, genetics, or statistics. But belief in destiny is the same, an excuse for surrender. We still fear the unknown, still seek patterns where none exist, still call randomness divine. The rule remains: chaos must be named. Science, which promised to free us from superstition, created its own priesthood. The lab replaced the chapel, the peer review the council, the journal the scripture. Knowledge must still be blessed before it is believed. We replaced faith with evidence, but evidence now demands faith. The rule remains: truth is not discovered, it is approved. Even in art, the medieval command to glorify the unseen persists. We praise artists who channel mystery, who speak of transcendence, who suffer for beauty. The starving artist is the new saint, creativity the new martyrdom. The rule remains: holiness through hardship. Our social systems, our religions, our habits, they are fossils of feudal logic buried under modern words. The medieval age never ended, it merely changed its uniform. We speak of progress, but progress itself has become a ritual, not a reality. The rule remains: tradition disguised as change. When we vote, when we work, when we worship the screen, when we chase success, We are following the same map drawn by medieval minds centuries ago. We still measure worth by obedience, purity, and belonging. We still crave order more than freedom. We still kneel, only now the altar is invisible. And in that invisible world of order and illusion, we continue to live as medieval souls dressed in digital clothes. We think we are modern, but our hearts still beat to an ancient rhythm. The rule remains: we obey because it feels safe. Here were always laws that no one remembered writing, rituals no one remembered beginning, and gestures so mechanical that they lost all their spiritual core centuries ago. In the medieval world, these laws formed the rhythm of daily life, and strangely, even in the 21st century, they are echoed faintly in our routines. To understand why, one has to look not just at royal courts or monastic rules, but at the silent, invisible habits that crept into people's bones. One of the oldest habits that survived the centuries was kneeling. The act of bending one's knee before authority began long before kings wore crowns. It was a gesture of submission and humility in pagan tribes. Later, it was absorbed by the Christian Church and reshaped into a symbol of reverence. But in the modern day, when people kneel before marriage proposals or before a flag, the movement carries ancient echoes. The medieval man kneeled before his lord, the peasant before his priest, the knight before his monarch. The body remembered long after the mind forgot. The medieval household was a maze of invisible hierarchies. The father was the miniature king, the mother the keeper of order, the servants bound by silent obedience. The idea that a family should operate under clear authority lines still survives in the invisible grammar of domestic life. Even our surnames, Baker, Smith, Carter, Mason, whisper medieval professions that defined a man's place in the chain of labor. We live under those names as if wearing the badges of ancestors long gone. The strange obsession with mealtime order, too, is medieval. The placement of salt on the table, the way one must wait for everyone before eating, or the notion of toasting before drinking, all are remnants of courtly dining. Salt was sacred, a symbol of preservation and loyalty. Spilling it was bad luck, because salt was once taxed like gold. Toasting was a ritual meant to prove that one's cup contained no poison, a courtesy inherited from suspicious lords. Even now we clink glasses to prove trust in company, though the reason is lost to memory. Time itself was felt differently. In medieval villages, people had no clocks. They lived by the church bells that marked each hour of prayer. The entire rhythm of existence, waking, working, resting, was dictated by those bells. The idea of the 9-to-5 workday grew from those monastic cycles. Even our week, 7 days long, owes its rhythm to the sacred calendar that the monks copied from Roman and biblical sources. The concept of weekends, too, echoes the medieval need for a holy rest. The world industrialized, but the habit of segmenting time by unseen bells remains. There was also the matter of manners, perhaps the strangest relic of all. The word courtesy literally meant behavior fit for a court. Forks, for example, were considered scandalous at first. To use one instead of one's fingers was seen as effeminate, but slowly the aristocracy adopted the fork as a sign of refinement. Now every restaurant teaches it as etiquette, and every child is scolded for holding it wrong, unaware they are reenacting a moral drama from 14th century Florence. Fashion, too, was ruled by laws. Sumptuary laws dictated what one could or could not wear based on class. Only nobles could wear fur of certain animals, only clergy could wear purple, and peasants were forbidden from silk. The echo of this remains today when logos and brands act as social signals. To wear luxury fashion is to follow a modern version of medieval hierarchy, less codified but equally powerful. Superstition governed even the smallest gestures. People knocked on wood to summon good spirits, avoided walking under ladders to dodge bad omens, and covered their mouths when yawning to prevent the devil from stealing their soul. These ideas began not as jokes, but as survival reflexes in a world drenched in unseen fear. The 21st century person who still hesitates before breaking a mirror or spilling salt is participating, unknowingly, in a 1,000-year-old ritual of invisible faith. Even the design of our cities carries medieval logic. Narrow lanes, central markets, and public squares, all derived from walled towns meant to protect against raids. The idea of downtown being the center of commerce is directly borrowed from those medieval centers where traders shouted over the noise of horses and bells. Modern skyscrapers replaced castles, but the instinct to gather and build hierarchy around wealth never left. The notion of privacy was alien to the medieval mind. People lived communally, sleeping, eating, and even bathing together. The modern obsession with private rooms, private property, and personal space evolved slowly from the noble class who could afford walls and chambers. When you close a bedroom door today, you are reenacting a luxury invented for kings and lords, later democratized by architects and urban planners. The medieval world was not entirely ignorant, it was practical. Its strange rules often had hidden logic. Handshakes, for instance, were not a gesture of friendliness, but of safety, proof that one carried no weapon. To remove one's hat indoors meant vulnerability, a sign of peace. The bow, the curtsy, the handshake, all are ghost movements of a time when everyone was a potential threat. In medicine, the remnants are darker. The concept of humors, that health depended on the balance of 4 bodily fluids, persisted well into the 18th century. Our modern obsession with detoxing or balancing energy mirrors that same logic. We may no longer bleed patients or apply leeches, but we still chase balance in new words, proving that language evolves faster than instinct. Religious practices dictated every hour, but they also created the blueprint of bureaucracy. Monasteries invented record-keeping, accounting, and library systems. The daily routine of monks cataloging texts became the skeleton of modern administration. Even today, when we fill forms, follow filing systems, or tick checkboxes, we mirror the monks' disciplined pursuit of order. And yet, beneath all these details, one fact remains. The medieval world was ruled not by kings, but by habit. Habit was stronger than law, more consistent than faith, and quieter than rebellion. Habit outlived crusades, plagues, and reformations. It marched, invisible, through generations, reshaping itself with each century's tools, but never dying. We, the modern descendants, walk streets that once echoed with horse hooves, obey signals that began as bells, and whisper politeness that was born in fear. Civilization may have changed its costume, but its bones are medieval. If one were to look at the world through the slow rhythm of a medieval hearth, one would see that the present is not as modern as it believes. Beneath every polished smartphone screen, every gleaming city light, there hides the faint, patient pulse of the Middle Ages, waiting, breathing, whispering its rules into modern behavior. The past is not gone, it is only disguised. Consider the ritual of marriage, one of humanity's most enduring performances. In medieval times, marriage was not about love, but about alliance, an exchange of property, a sealing of loyalty. The very phrase, to give away the bride, comes from the father's act of transferring ownership. Even now, the ceremony carries those bones. The bride walks in white, once a sign of purity and family honor, and the ring, once a symbol of binding contract, remains. The priest's words, the vows, the kiss, all of it is choreography borrowed from medieval liturgy, recited by modern voices that have forgotten their origins. The university system, too, remains deeply medieval. The term university itself comes from the universitas, meaning a community of scholars bound by oath. The robes professors wear, the Latin mottos carved into old buildings, the structure of lectures and degrees, all of it was designed by clerics in the 12th century. The cap and gown worn at graduations are not academic fashion, but remnants of priestly vestments. When a student receives a diploma, they are participating in an unbroken ceremony that stretches nearly 1,000 years backward. Then there is money, that silent controller of civilization. The word salary comes from sol, the Latin for salt, because Roman and later medieval soldiers were sometimes paid with it. The concept of banking, debt, and interest took root in the merchant republics of medieval Italy. The very shape of modern credit is a ghost of medieval trust systems. A handshake or a sealed letter was once enough to guarantee repayment. Now it is a signature and a contract, but the moral burden remains the same: faith dressed as finance. Medieval time was measured not by seconds, but by shadows. Sundials and candles, bells and prayers marked the passing hours. Today's obsession with punctuality is simply the industrial refinement of that old monastic discipline. The Benedictine monks who rang bells 7 times a day were training the Western world to obey the clock long before clocks existed. To be late today is to break a rule invented in a monastery. The legal system we trust to deliver justice was once a theater of fear. Trial by ordeal, holding hot iron, walking through fire, or sinking in water, was how truth was measured when evidence was scarce. Though these rituals vanished, the structure of law, with its hierarchy of judges, juries, and appeals, grew from those chaotic beginnings. Even the way we rise when a judge enters the room is a medieval act of reverence toward authority, not logic. The medieval fascination with titles and ranks persists too. The words sir, madam, lord, and lady survive as polite forms, though stripped of feudal power. Corporate structures mirror feudal chains of command. CEOs as kings, managers as knights, workers as peasants of industry. The medieval pyramid of obedience never fell. It merely changed its vocabulary. Religion was the architecture of thought. Every village revolved around its church, every calendar around its feasts. The modern holidays we celebrate, Christmas, Easter, even Halloween, are medieval inventions layered upon older pagan rituals. The calendar we use today was standardized by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, meaning every digital planner, every Google Calendar reminder still follows a papal system. The world moves to the rhythm of a medieval pope's correction of time. Public punishment once served as moral theater. Stocks, whipping posts, and public shaming were meant not just to discipline, but to display order. When someone today is humiliated on social media or publicly canceled, the instinct is the same: a communal spectacle of correction. We no longer throw stones, we throw words, but the crowd's hunger for moral clarity is timeless. The medieval obsession with purity and contamination still shapes our hygiene habits. The fear of disease, the rituals of washing hands, the separation between clean and unclean, all have religious and superstitious roots. Bathing in the Middle Ages was seen as both dangerous and sacred, tied to notions of sin and temptation. The modern soap commercial, promising purity and renewal, is simply a glossy echo of the same medieval promise: cleanse the body, cleanse the soul. Architecture, too, carries the memory. The very concept of a window as the eye of a house, the pointed arches of Gothic cathedrals, the idea that a tall building reaches closer to heaven, All were symbolic in medieval minds. When we marvel at skyscrapers today, it is the same awe peasants once felt staring up at cathedrals. Steel replaced stone, but the aspiration to touch the divine through height remained. Medieval people believed that names had power, and so do we. To name something was to define it, control it, give it form. The naming of storms, the branding of products, even the usernames on social media all echo the ancient conviction that words shape destiny. A knight's banner carried his family's name as a shield of identity. A modern logo serves the same function in digital warfare. Guilds were the backbone of medieval society, associations of craftsmen protecting their trade secrets. Today's unions, professional boards, and certifications are their descendants. The guild oath, swearing loyalty to one's craft, lives on in phrases like "do no harm" or "serve with integrity." Even the concept of apprenticeships, internships, and mentorship comes from the medieval system of passing skill through service. Food, too, follows invisible medieval rules. The distinction between breakfast, lunch, and dinner was formalized in monasteries, where prayer determined meal times. The word dinner comes from disjejunare, meaning to break fast. Even our table manners, the sequence of serving, the ritual of saying grace, are liturgies of daily life that have outlived their faith. The medieval concept of charity was never purely moral, it was transactional. To give alms to the poor was a way to purchase spiritual credit, to shorten one's time in purgatory. Modern philanthropy, with its tax breaks and public image, is not so different. The motive remains half moral, half self-serving, and entirely human. The fear of death, perhaps, is the deepest medieval inheritance. The Middle Ages were haunted by plague, famine, and war. Every sermon, every song, every painting reminded people of mortality. That obsession never left. Modern culture, obsessed with health, youth, and longevity, carries the same fear dressed in medicine's language. The medieval danse macabre, the dance of death, now takes the form of gym memberships and anti-aging products. The medieval person lived in constant awe of hierarchy, of God above, king below, and man beneath. The chain of being was unbreakable. Even our modern fascination with celebrities, politicians, and influencers echoes that same hunger to gaze upward. Feudal worship has been replaced by digital idolatry. Where once people knelt before a throne, now they refresh a feed. Perhaps the most ironic survival of all is our concept of progress itself. The medieval mind believed history was a divine story unfolding toward salvation. Today, we believe in progress as a secular salvation, that technology rather than God will redeem us. Both are forms of faith, both promise perfection, and both are doomed to repeat the cycle of disappointment. The past is not behind us, it is beneath us, in our gestures, in our laws, in our fears. We carry it like an invisible script written in the margins of civilization. We follow its lines without reading them. The medieval world did not end, it simply changed costume.
The medieval world was never truly buried. It was merely covered by layers of progress, as dust gathers over stone, as modern light hides the memory of candle flames. What we call modern life is a fragile illusion built upon foundations that are older than our languages, older than our science, even older than our understanding of reason itself. The rules that governed peasants, monks, and kings have survived in ways they could never have imagined. We obey them not because we remember them, but because we have become them. One might look at a modern courtroom and see a place of law, but if one listens carefully, the sound of medieval chants echoes faintly through its rituals. The standing, the swearing of oaths, the formal address to judges as Your Honor, the rhythmic reading of verdicts, all are remnants of liturgical drama. The courtroom is a church of reason. Its benches are pews. Its rituals are prayers. Its verdicts are absolutions. The costumes have changed. The gods have shifted, but the structure remains identical. The same can be said of our schools, hospitals, parliaments, and even our entertainments. The stadium is the new Colosseum, the election, the new coronation, the hospital, the new monastery of healing. What the medieval world invented in stone and parchment, the modern world rebuilt in steel and glass. Our skyscrapers reach higher, but their hearts are still cloisters of order and obedience. We imagine we have escaped the old world, yet we live inside its geometry every day. The medieval concept of record-keeping has multiplied into a digital universe of surveillance. Where monks once copied scriptures by candlelight, now algorithms copy our every word, our every image, our every choice. The monastery has become the internet. Both were designed to preserve memory, both to ensure nothing is ever forgotten. We have created a perfect archive, yet, like the monks, we are trapped inside it. The ancient feudal system, too, survives in strange disguises. Power still flows upward, and obedience still flows downward. Kings are now corporations, lords are now executives, and the peasants are those who scroll endlessly, producing labor for invisible masters. The titles have changed, but the rhythm has not. We speak of freedom, yet every click, every contract, every term of service binds us in the same silent oaths sworn by medieval serfs. Even our language is a cathedral built from medieval stones. Words like justice, honor, sin, virtue, loyalty, and truth, all inherited from a time when morality was written by monks and enforced by swords. We use these words daily, unaware that their meanings were carved by centuries of fear and faith. To live in language is to live in history. There is no escape from it. The medieval mind divided the world between light and darkness, good and evil, salvation and damnation. The modern mind, though clothed in reason, follows the same pattern, dividing opinions into right and wrong, people into allies and enemies, truths into sacred and profane. The internet, which promised connection, has become a new cathedral of judgment, its comment sections echoing with sermons and punishments. Every century invents its own version of sin and heresy, but the structure never changes. Art, too, remains haunted. The medieval painter filled churches with saints and angels to remind men of their fragility. The modern artist fills galleries with abstractions to remind men of their emptiness. Both are searching for meaning in a world that feels too vast. Both are praying in different languages to the same absence. Our relationship to time has also remained medieval. We still speak of deadlines, the line beyond which something dies. We still believe that time can be spent, saved, wasted, or lost, as if it were a physical treasure. This notion comes from the monastic schedule, the belief that every hour must be accounted for before God. Now we account for it before employers, calendars, and digital clocks. The bell that once summoned monks to prayer has become the alarm that wakes us for work. We still tell stories the same way they did. Heroes rise, fall, and are redeemed. Evil lurks in shadows. Goodness triumphs after suffering. The fairy tale was a medieval invention, but Hollywood merely changed its costume. The dragons are gone, but the villains remain. The castles have become corporations, the quests have become careers, and the treasure has become wealth instead of wisdom. The medieval world believed that truth was written in the heavens. We too look upward, not to stars or angels,
but to satellites and data clouds. Our gods have changed shape, but our worship has not. We still bow before forces we do not understand. We still trust invisible powers to guide us, and we still fear being cast out of their favor. The cathedral has become the network. The priest has become the algorithm. And yet, for all its shadows, the medieval world gave us something precious, the idea of continuity, the belief that life, despite its cruelty, has a structure, that the human story is not chaos, but sequence. Without that faith, the world would feel unbearable. The rules we inherited, absurd, rigid, outdated, are the bones of that faith. They remind us that people long before us asked the same questions, felt the same fears, and sought the same comfort in order. The act of shaking hands, of bowing heads, of saying please and thank you, of lining up, of praying, of pledging loyalty, of building hierarchies, of fearing shame, all of it is the inheritance of the medieval heart. To strip them away would be to strip away civilization itself. We think we have moved forward, but in truth we have only walked in circles, elegant, polite, mechanical circles drawn by monks 1,000 years ago. Somewhere in the quiet of the modern night, one can almost hear the sound of distant bells, the bells that once marked time for a sleeping village, the bells that told peasants when to rise, when to work, when to pray, when to rest. Those bells no longer exist, but their rhythm lingers in the heartbeat of the world. Every schedule, every calendar, every deadline still ticks to their forgotten song. The medieval world is not gone. It is breathing through us, speaking through our gestures, and dreaming through our machines. The next time someone says we are modern, one should listen closely to their words, for behind every syllable, the echo of 1,000 monks still murmurs in Latin, reminding us that nothing ever ends, it only transforms. And so the story of the medieval rules we still follow for no reason is not a tale of superstition, but of survival. We follow them because we are made of them. We obey because our ancestors did. We repeat because memory is stronger than change. The world believes it has outgrown the Middle Ages, but the Middle Ages live quietly in every handshake, every ceremony, every law, every faith, every fear, and every dream. History is not behind us. It is beneath our feet, whispering softly through the dust of time. And every step we take forward is in truth a step deeper into the echo of the past.